Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming along to the Centre for Social Justice's panel event and discussion on transforming rehabilitation today. We're really glad all of you could be here. Just to introduce myself, my name is Andrew Boyd. I'm the Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice, and I run our criminal justice programme, which, if you're interested, you can see online with a number of hopefully influential reports looking at reforming community sentences, highlighting issues of girls being trapped and sexually exploited in gangs, and we have a number of pieces of work coming up on prison reform and policing reform as well, so please do watch out for them. We're delighted to have the Minister for Prisons and Rehabilitation, Andrew Selous, with us today, and the rest of our panel, which I'll introduce in full in a second. But just to frame today's discussion and debate, what we're talking about primarily is the government's plans to try and make sure that when somebody goes to prison or has a community sentence, that they don't come back, that they get the rehabilitation that they need in order to make sure that they desist from further crime and start contributing fully to society. This is a problem that we've had for decades and decades, and if you look at the reoffending rates, people coming out of prison, people finishing community sentences, they fluctuate slightly, but they've been far too high for far too long. And the Centre for Social Justice sees, I guess, transforming rehabilitation in the eyes of something that is ambitious to try and reform this situation. We're going to hear from Andrew how it's going, I think, and have a debate on whether we think this ambition will be implemented in a way that will really see the change that I think all of us in the room would agree we need to see in this area of criminal justice. I'd like to thank as well our sponsors, the Barrow Cadbury Fund, without whom we wouldn't be here today, we wouldn't have the lovely free lunch and coffees we had earlier. So if you meet anyone from Barrow Cadbury, please do be extremely nice to them, and ask Debbie lovely questions as well. That would be great. Just to introduce, so from starting from the right-hand side, we have Rob Owen, who is the Chief Executive of the St Giles Trust charity that works with, does stellar work, in fact, working with so many ex-offenders coming out of prison in London to help get them resettled and accommodation into jobs, and I'm sure he will tell you more about that shortly as well. To his left is Debbie Pippard, who is the Head of Programmes at Barrow Cadbury Trust. Delighted you can be here today, and she brings a huge amount of experience in criminal justice and the voluntary sector in criminal justice as well, which, as you know, is a big part of what is important to the transforming rehabilitation agenda. And then last but not least, we have Andrew Selous, who's the Minister for Prisons and Rehabilitation, and he recently took up the post from being the Principal Private Secretary to Ian Duncan-Smith, and it seems if you want a job in justice, you start off in DWP in the well-trodden path, and but it's great to have you here. It's great to have you in this role, because work is such an important part of helping people recover their lives after they've finished a community sentence or prison sentence, and we're delighted you can be here today. We're going to finish just before 2 o'clock, and what we'll do, we'll have opening statements from the Minister and from the rest of the panel, and then we'll have Q&A. So please do think of interesting questions that you want to ask the panel, and hopefully we'll have a great debate towards the end. But I wonder if you could start by joining me in welcoming the Prison Minister, Andrew Selous.
Well, Ed, thank you very much for that kind introduction. If you don't mind, I'm going to sit while I speak. I've got a loud voice. If you can't hear me at any point, shove your hand up and I'll try and speak even louder. I'm just going to spend up to 10 minutes, I think I've been given, just explaining what our transforming rehabilitation reforms are about, why we're bringing them in, and the difference that we hope they will make. And it seems to me, when you have the privilege of being in government, and when you're confronted with a thorny, or a persistently thorny problem, you have two options. You can either carry on doing what you've always done, and that's the safe option, if you like, because doing what you've always done is comfortable and people know how to do it, even if the results aren't great. or you can show some ambition, and you can show some courage, and you can try to do things better. Now, we have unashamedly chosen the latter course. That's a course that, of course, can risk unsettling people, because I don't believe there's any change or any innovation on this type of scale which comes without some degree of unsettling those who work within the organisation. And we understand that, and we're absolutely committed to working alongside our staff to make the transition as smooth as possible. But I'm proud to serve under a Secretary of State who decided that the status quo wasn't good enough, and who decided to try to do something about it. And in the Ministry of Justice, we have a very simple aim. It can be summed up in one short sentence. We want to prevent victims by changing lives. We want to prevent victims by changing lives. I love the brevity, the simplicity, and the power of that one short sentence, because I think it really sums up what the Ministry of Justice does. Let me give you the figures on why this is an issue and why we decided to do something about it. If we look at reoffending rates for offenders released from custody or starting a court order in the year ending June 2012, the percentage that reoffended in 12 months was 57.8%. So nearly 6 out of 10 people sent to prison for a year or less had reoffended within a year. And the other thing you should know about that group is, before these reforms, they got no probation supervision at all. That's a big change that we're bringing in. Now, let me tell you what the National Audit Office says about the costs of that reoffending. The National Audit Office, in their report Managing Offenders on Short Custodial Sentences, estimated that in 2007-8, and this was a piece of work they did in 2010, that the total cost to the economy of crime committed by recent ex-prisoners was between 9.5 and 13 billion pounds. And of this, the cost of crime committed by offenders released from short prison sentences was around 7 to 10 billion pounds a year. Those of you who've just heard the Chancellor speak, he's said how he intends to save 3 billion pounds a year by changes to working age welfare. If we could deal with this group, as I say, the National Audit Office says there's a saving there of 7 to 10 billion pounds, not small sums of money, and think how else that could be spent more usefully by the government. Now, what are we spending on prisons at the moment? The Ministry of Justice currently spends just under £3 billion a year on prisons, almost £1 billion a year on delivering sentences in the community, including £800 million on probation. The total resource spending on prisons in 2011-12 was actually showed a real terms increase of just over a fifth since 1996-97, and probation spending has increased by over 70% between 1998-9 and 2010-11. So we believe that by reforming the system, we can make a difference to stubbornly high, and I would say unacceptably high, reoffending rates. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, we're doing it a number of ways. We're opening up the delivery of probation services to a diverse range of new rehabilitation providers. Quite simply, we want to get the very best practice out of the fantastic work by the probation officers, and there's some in this room here today I see in front of me who work for the probation service. We want the very best of what they deliver. We want the very best from the voluntary sector, and we want the very best from the voluntary sector as well. And what I would say to you is, why on earth would any government not want to use the very best available talent from the public, private and voluntary sector to reduce reoffending? Isn't any other approach an ideologically unacceptable one? And actually, if you look back at the history of the probation service, it goes back to 1876, when the Church of England Temperance Society established the London Police Court mission. and with the very first 2 probation officers. So if you look back at our history, probation actually started within the voluntary sector. So what we're going to do, we are introducing new payment incentives for market providers to focus relentlessly on reforming offenders. This will give providers flexibility to do what works, but only paying them in full for real reductions in reoffending. I'll say that again, we will only pay them in full for real reductions in reoffending. And for the first time in recent history, virtually every offender released from custody will receive statutory supervision and rehabilitation in the community. We are legislating to extend this statutory supervision and rehabilitation to all 50,000 of the most prolific group of offenders, those who are sentenced to less than 12 months in custody. And we're putting in place an unprecedented nationwide, through the gate, as we call it, resettlement service. And this means that most offenders will be given continuous support by one provider from custody, from within the prison, into the community. And we'll support this by ensuring that most offenders are held in a prison designated to their area for at least 3 months before release, and we call those resettlement prisons. And we've also created a new public sector national probation service which will work to protect the public, building upon the expertise and professionalism which are already in place. Now, the transforming rehabilitation reforms remain on track. We intend to implement them by 2015. At the moment, we are running a competition to set up what we're calling community rehabilitation companies. And we have a healthy competition in all 21 contract package areas. Bids are currently being rigorously assessed, and the contract winners for each community rehabilitation company will be announced by the end of 2014. And contracts for the new community rehabilitation companies will be awarded and mobilised by 2015, alongside bringing it into force the extension of post-release supervision for short-sentenced prisoners. So I'm going to draw to a close there, Ed, but happy to take questions and have a discussion later on.
Thank you very much. I want to hear from Debbie now, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting Barrow Cadbury Trust both to sponsor the event and to speak at it, and we're very pleased to be here. The Barrow Cadbury Trust, actually I'll stand up because I'm about as tall standing up as you are sitting down, and I can project a bit more to the back. Barrow Cadbury Trust is a family-led foundation, and we've had an interest in criminal justice matters since before we were founded, which is almost 100 years ago. We're particularly interested in young adults and in the transition to adulthood, and that comes from the inspiration of looking at people who are legally adults but who are not fully mature human beings. Sorry, adults. Are not fully mature, and we all understand what that means. They're very overrepresented in the criminal justice system, and subsections of that community are even more overrepresented than others. So BME people, we know, are incredibly poorly, are very much overrepresented, and the policy response is not always as appropriate as it could be. We also have a concern about the lack of gender analysis in the policy response, and I'd be interested to talk a bit more about how women can be dealt with differently from men in the CJS. I don't want to talk much about structures, because what we're interested in is the nature of the interaction between the individual and the service. And over the last 5 or 10 years, we've built up a really good body of evidence about what works with this age group. And in fact, the principles work with most age groups, because we're talking about taking cognizance of the whole individual, rather than trying to slot people into a service and giving them a standardised response. We know what works best is looking at what that person needs. It's a needs-led response to their particular constellation of needs. We know that listening to people is very helpful, and listening to children and young adults is no less helpful. We know that people who are in the criminal justice system are aware of the problems they face. Most people are not particularly keen on staying within it. Most people want to make the most of their lives, and if they're listened to and they have confidence that the service providers they're working with are beside them. And I think that with the best will in the world, it is very difficult for some statutory agencies to do that. So we know there are excellent probation officers, but it is quite difficult if you're responsible both for delivering a service and for sanctioning somebody if they don't comply with that service. But there are ways of working like mentoring and other sort of aspects of working alongside people where a relationship can be built up, and that's tremendously helpful. Thinking about partnerships, I was asked particularly to think about partnerships. I think integrated offender management's got a lot to offer. Other statutory services, mental health services particularly, we know that there's a horrible interaction between mental health issues and interaction with the criminal justice system. If that can be broken, that will be very helpful. Drug and alcohol services as well. But I also really want to emphasise this partnership with individuals and seeing people in the context of their family and community. We know that once you become 18, you're legally independent, but parents and families, and in fact the children of those young adults, have a legitimate interest in what happens to them, and we know that outcomes can be better if people are dealt with in the community. A couple of things about structural change. One is there's been some really good practice built up in this age group and in all other age groups over the years. And one of the big things we know that happens when there's structural change is that good practice gets lost, at least temporarily, because people are worried about their jobs, they're worried about changing the structures. I'm interested to know how we can prevent that loss of good practice. And also, as structures change and boundaries between structures are changed, we know that people tend to fall down the gaps. There's been a lot of work done on transitions between children and adult services over the last few years. And there's a danger with the separation of the CRCs and the probation, the service, that people will fall down those gaps instead. So we'd like to see a lot of attention paid to those particular issues as this change moves on.
Brilliant. Thank you. And unsurprisingly, if you could speak.
Thank you, Ed. You sent me a few questions. One was to answer what are the most significant barriers to rehabilitation, what does our work do to tackle that, and what's the one policy we'd want to recommend. And I suppose the very simple and obvious answer to the first question is a lack of a home, a lack of a job, and a lack of any positive support. It is richly that bleak, and I suppose it's also a better understanding that desistance isn't linear. And I suppose it's finally, my thoughts around this is it isn't just government's problem to solve. We've all got a role to play. So it was absolute insanity that so many prisoners were being released from prison serving less than 12 months with getting no support at all, ejected out of prison with just £46 in their back pocket. There's also a less obvious answer to this, which is a lot of people leaving prison have no self-belief, no self-worth, and this is worth tackling as well. Sadly, sometimes it feels that the whole system of rehabilitation is set up to fail. Statistically, it's 7 times more difficult to get a job with a conviction. Local authorities sometimes are now saying our clients are intentionally homeless because they've gone to prison, which isn't very helpful. And it still amazes me that you can leave prison and it can take 4 to 6 weeks to get your benefits set up. So these are quite toxic barriers that even the most determined individuals got to overcome if they want to break free of the cycle of offending. So the next question I was asked was, what have I learned? Well, I've learned that clients can change and that they can turn their lives around. And I'm pleased to say we see it every day, but it does take care, it does take determination, and it does take collaboration as well. So what's our part of the solution? Well, again, it's pretty simple, and I think it's what we're best known for. And it's why we get good results at reducing these reoffending rates. It's called our peer advice model. We feel, and I think many others do now, that those best to help turn the most disadvantaged away from breaking the cycle of offending is someone who's been there too. Someone uniquely credible to that client, a client who's probably been completely lost in the system and lost all faith in the system too. I'm sure they've been let down multiple times, by family, by school, by society often, and often I fear they don't have any feel for a stake in our society. And our peer advisors are often the first person who can actually get these very complicated, challenging, and sometimes most disadvantaged clients back into engaging, back believing in something, and continuing to help yet more people become not becoming unnecessary victims of crime in the future. So what we do is very simple. We select and train offenders in prison. We utilise them while they're in prison to gain a level 3 MVQ in advice and guidance. They are often able to go on and work for us in the community, and the model works that each of our peer advisors is able to help 50 or so offenders be met at the gate and help those people turn their lives around. Now, the real skill is absolutely in selecting the right peer advisor. And it's not about academic qualifications, it's about emotional intelligence, it's about a desire to make a difference, and for sure it's about credibility. And also it's about not only just the quality of staff that I will need. We're one of the major employers of ex-offenders in the system, and therefore it is the level 3 MVQ in advice and guidance. And it's also about making sure that they're delivered by someone who the clients believe in. I suppose it's also the fact that they are inspirational role models. Then it's about management and risk management and making sure that we have policies and procedures that are very robust, where our peer advisors are able to work enhance with the statutory sector. And it's also about creating the right culture. It's about creating a culture that rewards proactiveness and productivity, one that recognises care and creates a team that wants to go the extra mile for their clients. And that's, I think, the secret of getting great results. And it was highlighted to me a while ago by one of my staff shouting with genuine joy, "Yippee, I've got a triple arsonist to house." And I love that because it made me think that's exactly what we need. People who are determined to help the most difficult, the most complex, the people that no one else wants to help. Now, the evidence is pretty well known about our work in many ways. And I suppose the most impactful report was done by Pro Bono Economics, which was then sort of the first brainchild of Sir Gus O'Donnell. And it was a genuinely bomb-proof report. We were being funded by London Probation. It was a fantastic bit of work to work with 15 high to medium risk offenders. It was over a year, and it was £1 million. And the results from that, this is statutory data, so it's, we weren't torturing it, is that there was an additional reduction to reoffending rates by 40%. But most importantly for me was that for every £1 invested in that service, it saved the taxpayer 10. And actually what I most loved about it was it was reverse cherry picking. These were the clients we were being asked to deal with were from very overworked often, very frontline offender managers who needed some help with the most chaotic, often those with real housing issues, to help them break their cycle of offending. And I love that. Our biggest supporters were actually probation officers on the ground saying, "This is fantastic, you can help X, young Jimmy, this is brilliant, this is really helping me with my caseload." And it's no surprise to me that my staff, when we're in MAPA meetings, conversation goes like this. They'll be discussing 10 really, MAPA clients. The two most difficult ones, they'll say, "All right, we've tried everything, St Giles Trust, give it a go." And I suppose it's ultimately, what I love about the model is very simple. You're helping someone who's going to really struggle to find a job, an offender. You're giving them the right skills. They're uniquely brilliant at this weird, wonderful job, which is rehabilitation of very complicated people. They can go on and help 50 others. I suppose you look at the other wider, evidence of our work. Gaining employment because someone's had an engagement with one of our peer advisors goes from 24% to 44%. Helping someone find education or further education goes from 6% chance to 44% chance. So I think these peer-led solutions, using people's past experiences, when used intelligently, is the real glue in the future, the real change, the step change. And I suppose, what's my one policy recommendation? Well, I love quotes, and this quote was what Henry Ford once said, which I rather love. If I asked the customer what they really wanted, they'd have said a faster horse. I don't want to build a faster horse, I want to be delivering the first car. And therefore I suppose the policy I would want aggressively to encourage is the utilisation, application, and it attributes that all the peer model brings. Actively allow ex-offenders to help other offenders break their cycle of offending. And yes, that's in prison, not locking them up and allowing them to do that job, but most importantly, allowing them access to paid work in becoming world-class caseworkers, in helping scores of other offenders break away from a life of crime, and most importantly, helping to generate less future victims of crime. Thank you for listening.